Hi there, you're listening to Unnatural Selection, the show about newsy type stuff and things. My name is George.
My name is Tom.
And my name is Adam.
And with our powers combined, we are Unnatural Selection. Make sure you visit us at our salubrious home on the web, unnaturalshow.com, not to be confused with Natural Selection, the not very good comedy special by comedian Matt Rife.
Ah, yes. Sorry, I was wondering where you were going with that, and then I remembered your blow-by-blow live text chat commentary to us being like, this is shit. And I was like, why are you still watching it? It's like, oh, it's still so shit. Oh, he's got airplane food gear now. I'm like, why are you still watching it?
Okay, so the story was, I was playing a video game and I just needed content on the screen that I didn't need to look at. I should have just put a podcast on, but I started because it was called Natural Selection. Obviously, our podcast is Unnatural Selection, has been since 2010. So I feel like we got the jump on that. And then I noticed the titles for Matt Rife's Natural Selection look pretty similar to Unnatural Selection, the way it was written out and everything. I was like, okay, whatever. We'll watch this. And it was immediately bad. And it's one of those things that's like, it was there and I couldn't really turn it off because I was ensconced in what I was doing. But also it's one of those things that gets worse the more it goes on and you kind of become ensconced in the worseness of it as it continues. So you feel like more chip committed to it's what I imagine people who watch Married at First Sight experience, where it's like, this is terrible. These are terrible people doing terrible things to one another. I hate this. I hate everything about it. I'm going to watch 3 seasons.
We'll tune in this time tomorrow.
I watched the entirety of the comedy special and it was terrible.
But you're watching it while playing a video game.
I mean, it was on, so I got 2 screens. It was on the other screen. And so it was I didn't want to get out of what I'm doing in order to stop it. I just needed an hour of content that I didn't need to look at.
I was going to say, can we talk about the fact that you needed, in order to focus on the video game that you're playing, you needed to not be focusing on it, to be focusing on something else at the same time?
I just needed content, okay? I wasn't being precious about it. I just need
but it wasn't
jokes.
No, that's not my point. It doesn't matter what the content is. I mean, unless it's white noise or just
No, my attention is completely broken. I understand the internet has broken my brain.
What's going on with your hyperproductive mind, George? You listen to podcasts at
it's obviously
10 times
not
speed
hyperproductive if I'm listening to Matt Rife. Obviously, doing dumb shit faster doesn't make it productive.
What was your character doing in the video game? Just walking into a wall repeatedly?
Because you were also live texting us at the same time. Yes! So you had your focus on 3 things.
His newborn son in the other rooms, just yo.
It was late at night. I wasn't in charge of baby. Leave me alone. I will freely admit that the internet has completely broken my brain. That I will say. It's obviously a situation. I should have just put a podcast on. That's what I normally do. But I was like, oh no, the comedy special, this seems to be making the rounds. I'll watch some stand-up comedy. And boy, was it technically stand-up comedy.
But someone from Netflix greenlit that. Do you know what I mean? And they greenlit it, recorded it, watched it, and went, still good, and published it.
Massive special. It was making the rounds. It was in articles. This wasn't Tom Segura released a new special. It's on Netflix. Check it out if you're a fan of his. It was Netflix was pushing it. They're like, hey, do you want to listen to some guy make jokes about domestic abuse? And I was like, not really.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've only heard some snippets from
the first
his
joke
material, and I was like, oh, this is the kind of stuff that we all thought as teenagers was edgy good shit before the internet, before we fucking knew any better.
Yeah, but the guy's 28. He's not that much younger than us. You know what I mean? It's that's the kind of comedy that we did when we started this show in 2010 and have since deleted because it no longer meets current standards. And he's just
current standards then. And we just realized we're not proud of this and let's be better people. But he's like, no, I think I got this.
But he's 2023 and he's like, you know what would be fully sick for the opening joke of my stand-up comedy special, which is going out via Netflix to millions of people, a sweet ass joke about domestic violence. And they weren't even like, they were just like street jokes. They weren't even like, oh, this is like
a story
from your life. It's just like clearly something you've like put like joke premise into ChatGPT, and like, it's like, you know what's better than being someone's first, being someone's last, having sex with a bunch of grannies because they'll be grateful for it. I was like, what the fuck am I watching? What is this? Did you generate these premises, like cut up a bit of magazine and like just mix it up in a hat and just pull words out until you came up with comedic premises? Like, what the fuck?
The South Park manatee. Is it South Park or is it the Family Guy with the manatees?
In South Park, and they say Family Guy uses manatees to just pick they make third things.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
You pick three things out.
It's just frustrating because like there are so many great stand-up specials out there by, you know, like Gareth Reynolds, who's one of the guys from the Dollop podcast. He had a great special called England, Weed and the Rest, which was great, but I watched that on YouTube and it was just like a thing that he self-filmed and produced and put out there. He probably got fuck all money for it. Like, that's great and it's on YouTube, but like this, and it's because he's a handsome fuckboy on TikTok who gets a lot of views, and so that's why they're like, oh, this guy's engagement is through the roof. All of the fucking crowd work he does. The guy's a genius. We've got to give him a special because think of all the clicks we'll get. And it's like, okay, but like, is the thing that you are creating actually any good, or you're just creating like algorithm fodder? Because like this,
George, they don't understand the question.
No, they really don't.
It's like, hang on, is it actually any good, or will it just make you a lot of money? It's like, I don't understand how those are.
The answer is yes. Yeah.
Like,
well, speaking of content, we have several hundred episodes worth of content. If you want to listen to more of us, you can obviously go to our website and find the links. Go to your Spotify, go to your podcatcher of choice. But we have gone wildly off topic because we are, in fact, a podcast about newsy type stuff and things. So we should get back to the content. I'm going to steer this ship back on course with my segue. And the first story this week. Indeed. The first story this week is of creeping politicisation in Victoria's public service, which sounds much less interesting than Matt Rife, actually. Let's go back and talk about that.
Let's spend another 10 minutes shooting on Matt Rife.
Clearly, they just want to fuck this guy because he's handsome. I don't think anyone, it's like a 70% female audience that are there just going, woo! They're not there for the jokes. They don't care about the pure art form. Anyway, so Dan Andrews was a bad boy, according to the ombudsman. Very bad boy. Tell me slowly.
There was a report this week released by the Victorian Ombudsman, which looked into basically whether or not the Labor government in Victoria had been effectively stacking the public service with effectively Labor lackeys, right?
So there was an article that came out in 2022, I think it was, that basically made the allegation that a bunch of Labor, former staffers and things like that are getting appointed to government positions. And the whole idea is like government, the Labor is so entrenched within the government here that even the public service, which is meant to be apolitical, right, and give frank and fearless advice, is being stacked with cronies. Now, this report, which came out on Wednesday by Deborah Glass, the ombudsman, has said basically like, no, we haven't found any examples of that kind of stacking. However, there are a number of practices that are present within the Victorian government which are extremely troubling around politicization. So essentially, situations where people were really reluctant to speak to the ombudsman, refused to go on record. There was a pervasive climate of sort of fear of speaking out against the government would be career suicide and that sort of thing. So it's like, whilst they didn't substantiate the allegation that was put to them initially, it's like, hey, there's a bunch of stuff that's going on in government that you may not necessarily be super happy with. To which the government responded, so we did great.
It's all good.
I think we're good, yeah. Well, that's all right then.
Yeah, so in response to the allegations, Tim Palaszczuk, however you pronounce his name, was basically said that, look, obviously they didn't find any evidence, so therefore we're great, and we don't have it. There's no culture of
So what I heard was Tim's great. That's what I heard out of that.
But of course, if there is a culture of fear, you wouldn't hear anything, Tim, about anything because
I'm not hearing anything about this pervasive culture of fear in my government from my subordinates. That's weird.
Yeah. Like the great British sitcom, they would simply be saying, "Yes, Minister."
Yes, Minister.
So the report was, I guess, commissioned after was a referral from in 2022 from the Parliament's upper house. So former Labor Minister Adem Somyurek, if I pronounced that correctly, alleged that the public service had been stacked with operatives from the party. So there were, but this is with every government, right? So what happens is you've got ministerial advisors, who are on the public service, who are on the payroll. They will sit within the minister's office at the head of a department, and the department is meant to feed advice up the chain to those advisors, who then advise the minister, right? And the minister then advises.
So you got the public service who are unelected. They sit there and feed stuff up.
The people who just work in the office.
They're meant to give frank and fearless advice. That's the term.
Yeah.
And then they pass it up to the elected representatives, the advisors, and the politicians, and then they make decisions based on their election promises as to what to do. But it's always meant to be with the idea that it's all in the public interest and these people are impartial. Now, when you've got situations where, and this is what Glass says in her report. So this included the frequent appointment of former ministerial staffers without open and advertised processes, often explained by a pressing need to hire someone familiar with government policy to, quote, get things done. We found multiple examples of rushed and shoddy recruitment practices, poor record keeping, and opaque selection methods. So basically what you're saying is, whilst it's not a clear-cut case of like someone who wasn't qualified for the job got the job, there were situations where someone's gone, we need someone for this job, and this person is qualified, but he is also a former staffer who worked for us. So it's like, it's kind of murky as to like, and I guess that's just politics. Is that just politics?
Everywhere. This happens everywhere. Right?
Is that just garden variety sort of politics to a certain extent? Like you hire people that because I know Adam's good at XYZ because I've known him for 10 years. I'm going to hire him for this role. Is that nepotism? Is that favoritism? Or is that just kind of like naturally people refer people that they know and people that they've worked with because referrals are better than, taking a chance on someone that you might, that you don't know who might not be any good at the job. But
how so many like that's not unique to government structure either, right? Like that's literally how most recruitment kind of works, right? Like, either pinching people from other departments or like from, conflict of interest businesses across. Like it's where non-compete clauses had to exist, right? For that very reason.
In all the tech companies I worked for, there was always a referral bonus because, they would pay substantial amounts of money in the thousands of dollars for, as like, if you refer someone to the company who's good and gets through probation, we'll give you like X amount of thousands of dollars because that is valuable to the organization because hiring people is expensive and doesn't work well all the time. But the thing with the public service is that it's meant to be a merit-based system that's got really transparent, accountable processes. To say that like, so you're not getting jobs for mates, you are getting jobs for the people who are the very most qualified people to hold that position because it's a position of public trust, right?
It does mean that, that hiring in the public service is generally known to be quite clunky and time consuming. But it is there, as you said, for a purpose. Now, I guess, the other thing this report alleges is that effectively frank and fearless advice was bypassed in a number of key projects. And the big project that they've pointed to here was the government suburban rail loop. So for context, if you're not from Melbourne, I want to say like 2017, 2018, something like that.
It was announced as a promise in 2018.
2018, yeah. The government said, we're going to build a big loop around Melbourne to connect the different train lines. So currently Melbourne's train lines spread out like a spider web around the city. at its center, and then this would then connect the dots, if you will, around the edges.
The second layer of that web connecting the outer suburbs. Right.
Exactly. Now, at the time, I do remember going, "Oh, that's a big, that's a big aspirational goal." But they just announced all the level crossing stuff, and there were other things that the Andrews government was doing. I was like, "Oh, well, look, it's good to have targets." But it turns out, allegedly, what had happened was with this that the public service really wasn't consulted that much on this project. What had happened was there were a bunch of, I guess, ministerial advisors that had, been to a PwC conference or one of those sort of
everyone's favorite consultants, PwC.
I don't know if it was it actually PwC was it PwC? Yeah. One of these consultants conferences, PwC, and had basically dreamt up the idea, and then they'd kept it secret and they'd workshopped it at the ministerial level with external consultants for a number of months before eventually announcing it. When they announced it, the public service were like, well, I guess we're going along with this now. Which is very much like an episode of Utopia.
Yeah, right. The ministers announce something, and then the people who do the work actually have to be like, uh-oh, now we have to do this.
Yeah. So that was seen to be, and this has been raised before, right, with the whole thing around Deloitte and various government contracts with these consulting firms, is that there's this sort of symbiotic relationship that's getting potentially a little bit unhealthy in terms of transparency.
Or parasitic, maybe.
Parasitic, perhaps, yeah. There is a lack of transparency with these big consulting firms and government's relationship with them at both the federal and the state level. So that was a bit concerning. I was like, the suburban rail loop seems like it's going ahead. They've made a lot of headway in terms of the planning of it. They've started sort of, I guess, acquiring land and stuff. Allegedly, it was kept secret to stop land speculation along the train line. And there is history of that, back in the day, like in the 1880s or whatever else, where they expanded train networks, and then the members of parliament were like, oh, we're going to expand the train network. And then they would buy
let me just pick up some land conveniently located, and which will all of a sudden be worth 10 times as much when the train line comes through. Yeah.
Meanwhile, in Point Cook in those suburbs, they're like, so when are we getting a train line? Anyway, so yeah, that was the big example that Glass used in her report as being sort of,
Well, here's what she said. The stated reason for the secrecy to quote mitigate against land speculation does not stack up, as no land was acquired by the responsible agency before a public announcement, and in any event would not justify keeping the relevant secretary in the dark. It was proved up by consultants rather than developed by public servants, and its announcement blindsided the agency set up by the same government to remove short-term politics from infrastructure planning. So yeah, I don't buy the argument that it's like, oh, we're just trying to like hedge it against corruption, by keep it secret, keep it safe. It's clearly an attempt to cook up policy outside of government in a way that basically circumvents the public service, because I don't know, maybe they didn't want to get bogged down, or they didn't trust the people who work below them to deal with it properly.
Wasn't it?
Either way, it's not good.
Was it an election announcement as well?
They made the election promise in 2018.
Yeah, so it was an election. It was an election promise. So it was a political move.
Oh yeah,
I can remember being at the time. I was like, oh, that's awfully convenient that you want to announce the biggest infrastructure project in Australia's history.
Or maybe they just wanted to simplify it. Maybe it's like we don't want this getting slowed down. We don't want this getting pulled apart or beaten up. We just want a nice, clean process for our idea to have no scrutiny.
Yeah, they want to avoid all the red tape.
Not what government is supposed to do. And look, of the kinds of political corruption that can exist in a political system, I think this is one of the lower levels of corruption. But I think what this is evidence of, to my mind, is how weak the Liberal Party is in Victoria, is that the Labor government here in Victoria has gotten sort of ossified and sclerotic. And this is what happens when you have continuous terms of government when you have one party rule for a decade. This is kind of what happens, is branches start finding themselves filled with political, friends And, like, it's not necessarily like, here's a canvas bag with a dollar sign on it, and you give me XYZ in exchange. Like, it's not that kind of corruption, but it still shows the kind of how much the power has centralized to the office of the Premier, which has been a critique that other people have leveled at Dan Andrews and the office of the Premier. It's not just from this one source. Like, I think it's a pretty common critique of the Dan Andrews government at this stage, that they sort of centralized a lot of power and decision-making authority. And I don't want to use the term dictator, Dan, because that is loaded for a bunch of different reasons from previous time periods. But there has been a real centralization of power. And what happens when you centralize power in that way is you don't get governance. You don't get transparent, accountable processes, which is what government is meant to be. And I think that's just the fact that they've had, because they haven't had an opposition that could, fit more people than a canoe over the last few election cycles. Like, they haven't had to be challenged from the other side on any of this sort of stuff. And they've gotten kind of complacent, I guess, would be the way I would describe it. And it's like,
potentially as well. The other thing being is
good.
that, like, over the course of 10 years, because remember, the Labor government's been in power for so long, is that, I mean, obviously this political friends being sort of infiltrating their way into various bits of
finding their way.
It would happen. I think it happens at every level. And I'm pretty sure Labor made the same comment at the federal level about the former Liberal government, was that,
jobs to mates. It was a whole news cycle.
Yeah. But the fact is, if you do it for such a long period of time, as you said, it's not so much that it was a concerted effort. It just, it adds up. Yeah. But it was interesting. It's probably a good way to segue into the next article today as well, unless you want to say anything else about it. But this was front page news of the Herald Sun on the day it was announced. And it was like, they have some advertising, and then they have a little panel off to the right, and there's a 4-page spread on, pages 7, 8, 9, 10 on this big scandal about Dan Andrews. Meanwhile, so I went to the cafe and I picked up the Herald Sun. I read through that, went, okay, cool, put that down. Went to the next paper, The Age. Don't know where they mentioned it, like probably back at like
page 14.
The Age then had as their front page spread this next story, which was that Alan Jones, the former 2GB radio host, a radio shock jockey, as we call them, I think, these days, has had a number of indecent assault allegations leveled against him, led by a 9, age, sort of conglomerate of journalists, and that was their sort of front page headline. And again, a 4-page spread if you go back to page 6, 7, 8, 9 of the paper. Just interesting walking into a cafe
to see the dichotomy between the two.
Completely different priorities.
Well, you're seeing the different priorities of media organizations.
It's that's not unusual though. I mean, there was a guy who wrote a book on the Squad recently. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and over in the States. It's a group of sort of Democrats, sort of on the left of the party, known as the Squad. But essentially, what in talking about the book, he said that there was a real, on the right, real focus on these figures in a way that there wasn't on the left and in the leftist media. It's like the figures that we are on the left most familiar with are like Tucker Carlson, and the extremists on the other side tend to be the focus of the media organizations on the other side. So for the right, they're really focused on AOC and Pramila Jayapal and these sorts of politicians. And on the left, we're focused on Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump. And it's just interesting to see that sort of, the things that one, you can tell who the media is against by who they focus on, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I'm sure that, the leftist media took no small amount of glee in reporting on allegations against Alan Jones. And
pretty much, I mean, look, I don't want to go into too much detail on the allegations, but they were pretty concerning. There were a number of gentlemen that basically came forward and said that they'd either worked with, or I think one of them was a waiter at a restaurant, and basically, in certain circumstances, Alan Jones had allegedly groped and kissed and made other unwanted sexual advances towards these men over the course of various years. And I guess what the paper was trying to sort of allege was that there was a repeated pattern of behaviour. And very quickly, straight afterwards, Alan Jones's lawyers have fired up the defamation cannon.
Oh, let him cook. Let him do it. Come on, Alan, do it. I'd love to see Alan Jones get the Bruce Lerman, Ben Robert-Smith treatment.
So I was going to say, we've got
on the stand. Let him do it.
We've got all three generations of defamation actions. We've got Ghost of Christmas Past, Ghost of Christmas Present, and Ghost of Christmas Future between those three.
Yeah. Oh.
I don't understand why anyone thinks it's a good idea to initiate a defamation action. Like, I really just, like, from everything that we've seen, I understand that people want to clear their name, but like everything that we've seen from everyone who's had a high profile, high profile legal campaign on defamation, it's blown back at them. It's Streisand affected the whole thing. I mean, like, the Bruce Lerman is going through that experience right now. So it's like, regardless of the person's guilt or innocence, right? As someone who is like a rational actor for like Schrodinger's sexual assault, we don't know whether it happened or not. Assuming that you're a rational actor, presumably the last thing that you want to do if you feel as though your good name has been tarred is like shout it from the rooftops. Like, and that seems to be what a defamation action does. Like, I've never heard of like a defamation action going to court and it being like quietly resolved. You know what I mean? Like, you always get way more articles about it, and then people have to get up on the stand because they're obliged to, and then there's examinations and cross-examinations, and then there's a whole, a week or two's worth of reporting as the case works its way through the courts. Like, it just
the very fact that that the defamation suit itself will be reported on, kind of shoots the whole concept in the foot.
Yeah, you can't control that. It's like, if you really don't
control that,
if you don't want people saying these things about you, then shh. You're a millionaire. Just go to your millionaire house, go to your private island somewhere, and just shush.
Yeah, that's where like one of the few instances I could think of something like taking defamation action mattering is if you are not a millionaire, like you are just a person who's being accused of some like heinous stuff or just said things that you want to defend, and you feel like you've got a pretty bulletproof like backstory, like like history to go through. Like that's hard to guarantee.
Because the thing is everyone thinks they've got a bulletproof backstory. They're like, bro, I'm gonna be smarter than these lawyers, and I'm gonna get up on the stand. I'm gonna be a wizard, and it's gonna be primal fear. I'm gonna be Edward Norton. People are gonna think I'm a very sympathetic character, and then turns out he was evil all along. Ruined primal fear. But you're not ever smarter than the lawyer. Lawyers are pretty smart, and they're going to be working on this case for 6 months before it comes up. And they're going to have 6 months of fucking prep trying to make you look like the worst possible version of yourself. That's going to be all they're focused on for 6 months. And you're going to turn up on the day and go, bro, I got this. This is airtight. And they're like, hey, remember this time you did fucked up shit? And you're like, oh, I forgot about that. And they go, hey, remember these 18 other times you did fucked up shit? You go, oh, fuck, I forgot about it. I'm starting to look like a really bad person. And it's like, yeah, of course. And it happens every single time because their lawyers are good at their jobs. They get paid several $100s an hour to look at this for months. They're going to come up with something. Like,
yeah.
So,
which again is not
really
to
ill-advised.
Not to make any aspersions as to the guilt or the innocence of any of the people that we've mentioned, because I too do not like being sued for defamation. But just like, it's just not ever, it's never going to work out for you if you're the guy. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. It's far more risk than it's worth.
Exactly.
And it's just, I think probably the only way to sort of fix that kind of system, if you want to actually like have a proper defamation recourse that doesn't cause more damage in the event that, say, because even if you win, right, there's going to be a litany of reporting that exists forever that people can find,
regardless,
where people believed that this was something that you may or may not have done, and then that allegation just still exists and is out there, and then that can tarnish your reputation and all that sort of stuff. Anyways,
and Amber Heard, where it's just everyone just ends up in a shit sandwich.
There's a fucking documentary about it now. It's like Netflix has greenlit a miniseries. Like it doesn't make it go away.
And the part of the Bruce Lerman stuff had this as well, that it's live streamed and it's recorded for everyone to watch. It's like, I think, while like there are things that happen in courtrooms that are of course of the public interest, but I think the amount of oversight we sometimes get of what's going on in a court can be too much. In that, like, just live streaming testimony.
Maybe defamation, like suing for defamation, worked in like 1880, where it was like two newspapers and you owned one of them, and you know what I mean, and you could like make your case that way, and it was like, you know, it was one newspaper or the other, and it was like, no one really knows. But it's like in the modern situation where people are like literally live tweeting from the gallery, which is what happened someone got told off during the Bruce Lerman civil hearing for like tweeting
recording it
in court,
or they were like, you know, the live stream, they'd like screen recording it and being like, oh my god, look at this snippet, and memeing it or whatever. It's like, no, like that's just far too much. Not to say though, the idea of courts all operating in secret also scares the absolute shit out of me. So like, there's no perfect sort of system.
I guess, but what I'm saying is like, in an age of social media, like you're just going to put rocket fuel on whatever it is that's happening. Like if the eye of Sauron of the media turns to this story, that's it. It's going to blow up. Like you don't have a choice in it. So
the
journo that put this big story on Alan Jones together is Kate McClymont, who is noted. So she's a very famous nine-time Walkley winning investigative journalist. She's
not an idiot. She's not like some schmuck.
No, she broke the story on Eddie Obeid, on Charlie Teo, the neurosurgeon, his misconduct, Don Burke's serious misconduct allegations, and she's put together a Walkley nominated podcast, Liar Liar, about the fraudster Melissa Caddick. This is the woman who just like mysteriously went missing one day. Like she's incredibly famous and well regarded, awarded. And she did an interview where she talks about this. She goes, like, I stand by our reporting. We've got a lot of sources. Like, I worked on this for a long time. We did a lot of hard work to make sure this was all legit. Yeah. And our lawyers went through it with a fine-tooth comb. Like, this didn't fucking happen by accident that we published this story. We did a lot of work to get here.
We don't shoot from the hip.
Exactly.
Yeah, like no good journalist just shoots something like this, just going like, we're pretty sure.
Yeah, it's not like someone just like tweeted something nasty. Shane Barzy, just like ripped off a good tweet one day without necessarily thinking of the consequences. It's like, no, this is a situation where it's gone through a rigorous process over months to validate these accusations before going to print. So
and the thing is, I guess the paper is simply airing other people's allegations who are on the record publicly with their names, photos, and everything in the paper. So I guess the question then, I guess the paper is the one ultimately that will be...
Well, I don't know if the people...
It's liable, but you can always turn around and go, well, and this is where defamation, the defense will be the truth defense, right? So basically we haven't defamed you because what we have said is true, but they will then have to prove truth, which is what we've just discussed.
And we're going to have to go to court and we're going to get all these things on the record.
And it has to be a balance of probabilities. It's not beyond all reasonable doubt. It's balance of probabilities. Do you think it is more likely than not that Alan Jones groped this individual based on that individual's testimony?
Yeah, I would like to clarify. I don't know. As far as I'm aware, none of the individuals have been named. They've got a pseudonym for the people that have made allegations against Alan Jones.
They got photos in the paper. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if necessarily they might have used pseudonyms, but their face and at least, some of the photos were from a number of years ago, I guess, as well. But there would be people that would recognize that. Yeah. Anyway. So, I mean, by the sounds of it, and Ray Hadley has also said that he's spoken to one of the victims.
That was an interesting twist.
And apparently, the reason why Ray Hadley, because they used to work for the same radio station, the reason why Ray Hadley and Alan Jones fell out was allegedly because of some of these allegations. So, if that's true, obviously, Ray Hadley was pretty, I think, careful and sort of emotional, I think, when he was explaining this from the sounds of it. So, I don't necessarily, I think, sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire, maybe in some of the minor details. This is the thing, as you said, like Alan Jones is going to be questioned on all these things. Alan Jones probably doesn't even remember half of it.
And you're going to have to account for movements of where you were on this day X amount of years ago. And, I don't see there being a way of getting, regardless of your guilt or innocence in the matter, I don't see there being a way of navigating that process unscathed.
Yeah. No. Yeah. So anyway, watch this space for more news within the news.
For Ray Hadley to come out on his show unprompted and be like, "Hey, one of the people who made these accusations against Alan Jones came to me with a contemporaneous account at the time." It's like, wow, that's not good.
Yeah,
that's not good for Alan Jones.
Yeah, but no, Alan. Don't take our discouragement of the whole process to heart. Do it.
You do you, buddy. Go
Please
for it.
do it.
No,
Please
look, don't far be it from me to give advice to Alan Jones. Obviously, you're a man of advanced years and a font of a suppository of wisdom. So I think you do whatever comes naturally to you.
Yeah. For anyone else, it's a stupid idea that nothing good will come of it, and you'll just do more harm than good. But for you specifically, for you, nothing but rainbows and sunshine. It'll be great. It'll work perfectly. Please take them to court for defamation.
I reckon this time's the time, Alan. Take a crack.
Yeah,
it is interesting that as we said that people of his status, shall we say, and a level of power, or form of power perhaps, do want to litigate so hard. And I think there's probably a fear of being cancelled. They had this great fear of cancel culture, but,
but he's fucking 82 or something.
And he's Alan Jones.
Yeah, he's a millionaire.
I meant amongst the people who cancel people. Alan, that ship sailed. They hate you. They think you're terrible. You are cancelled. I think you're terrible.
Do we think the lawyers for his lawyers are potentially they reckon they've got a good case. They reckon they've got evidence they can use to dispute what they call what was the wording? I've closed the article now, but a series of you were
just done with it. I'm done with it. Fuck it.
I'm done with it. Closed it. But a pattern of events. They've got enough evidence to dispute a pattern of events, basically. But you got to wonder, are they?
They always say that though, right? I bet Ben Robert Smith's lawyers said that.
Anyway, I guess you got to come out swinging, don't you? You got to be hard on your position.
But you can do that without doing defamation stuff. You can just be like, I adamantly deny this, and then that's it. Yep, you've denied it. Cool. All right, great. Then we'll see what happens. But no, Alan, it'll work. Do it. Please do it for me. Christmas treat.
I don't remember the his lawyers, Mark O'Brien Legal. I remember seeing someone say that.
They're a no win, no fee kind of firm.
Oh, I don't know. I remember reading that they'd represented other
high
profile people who'd been sued for defamation.
I don't think any defamation lawyer would advertise the no win, no fee.
Yeah, no, that's
you'd have to be insane.
Not a mark of quality.
No. So our next story, we're sticking with government policy and other bits and pieces. Not that was government policy, but Australian news, shall we say. The federal government is set to unveil a major new migration strategy on Monday, so that'll be tomorrow from the time of recording, that aims to dramatically cut Australia's intake. For context, net overseas migration is estimated to be about 500,000 people over the year to September, which is quite a lot. And a lot of that is being driven by international students. Obviously, when the pandemic ended and China lifted its ban on foreign students, I think everyone turned around and sort of the dollar signs went cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching.
I think there was a lot of different universities that really struggled financially over the pandemic as a result of not having those foreign students, right? So the idea of being able to
completely change their business model,
exactly,
around requiring overseas students rather than
just imagine all of a sudden a quarter of your revenue is just not allowed to happen. It's like, well, that's actually made it quite difficult for a lot of Australian universities to cope with that.
But also, like, should they have gotten to that position in the first place? That's a whole nother argument.
That's a whole other question.
Let's not get me into that argument, or I'll get angry. But they are very reliant for whatever reason on those students. So
many industries are as well.
Yeah. So it's not just students. There's obviously different skills. Like I've got a colleague that I work with. Her partner's a welder, and he's a skilled migrant, and they got a permanent residency application approved pretty quickly, really, in a couple of weeks, because they need that trade for that industry. There's a skill shortage. Get them in.
Well, there's only two real ways of dealing with the skill shortage. It's remove the barriers to training, right?
Yeah.
Or bring people in with those skills. Like there's only so many ways you can handle industry shortages, and there are a number of industry shortages as evidenced by the state government's free TAFE programs, where if you want qualifications, particular qualifications like Cert 4s in nursing or particular kinds of construction or things like that, you can go and study for free at various participating universities. Like the government will fully fund your place to go and study whatever it is, because there's a real shortage of these particular industries. So,
100%,
there are real shortages, and I think also that's part of the question as to around what's driving inflation, and particularly services inflation and wage inflation. Historically, over the last sort of couple of years, has been the fact that we haven't had that migration. Like prior to the pandemic, there was a lot of people coming in on a regular basis to fill, skilled labor positions. And if you have a shortage of labor and you can't bring in more people from overseas to fill those spots, and people are, only get X amount of people trained up in any given year to fill those spots. Well, what happens? So you need to pay the people. If you want to compete for talent, you got to pay more in order to get that talent. So where does that wage increase end up? It ends up in inflation. So you have to pay more for a construction company to build your house if they need to pay chippies twice as much in order to get them on the job, right?
Twice as much, George? Try a couple more than that. So
what's the new strategy?
So the new strategy, which apparently has been signed off by Cabinet and follows months of consultation with the higher education sector, business groups and other stakeholders, it is steps will be taken to cut the intake of foreign students entering, and this is the term, low-quality courses.
That's very loaded.
So
what courses are those?
So it's not that they're capping the number of foreign students, but they're not allowing as many low-quality training providers and limit opportunities for student visas to be used as a backdoor for low-skilled workers to stay in Australia. So
there were stories anecdotally of people who would. Now, I don't know how much truth there is to this or how large of a percentage it's meant to make up of like total foreign students, but I remember when I used to work in hospitality, there was kind of this sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge understanding that people came to Australia to study, right? But the implication was, that they were really here to work and live in a first class, not a developing nation, a developed nation which had higher wages, higher living standards. And so they'd use the excuse of coming to study. And it meant that there were restrictions then on how many hours you could work in a job, because it's like, well, you can't work more than 20 hours because you're meant to be studying. But then people would go work a bunch of like cash in hand jobs in order to like get by, because it wasn't
off the books,
because it wasn't like enough money to actually like sort of make ends meet. And the study was really just then used as an excuse. Now, again, I don't know how pervasive that was. I don't know what percentage of I imagine that a large majority of foreign students who are coming to Australia to study are actually interested in a qualification. And it is the getting of those qualifications that then allows them to turn around and participate in the economy in other ways, like, filling, who do you think are the people that are working in the disability sector in sort of social care and health. It's the people who have gone and gotten these qualifications in nursing or disability care or aged care that then turn around and start populating those industries. Like if you've had any connection with aged care or disability care, you will note that it is almost entirely populated by
migrant workers,
by people from Southeast Asia or people from Latin America or like places which are developing. And so I kind of like, I'm in two minds about it, because it's like, I work for a university. Obviously we want students to come in and, take up those courses that are being offered. But also at the same time, I'm curious as to like, if the point is to crack down on low quality training providers, people who are providing junk qualifications to people in order to sting them for money, in order to take advantage of their want to come to Australia, that doesn't really have anything to do with migration numbers. That should just be framed as, hey, we're going to make sure that people in the industry are giving qualifications that are high quality. Like,
it's like that. That just sounds more like you're trying to prevent fraud. You're trying to stop scams.
If it's about the regulator, having more teeth, going after dodgy institutions, places that aren't serving their students well, I'm fully in support of that. But then that doesn't necessarily, like, it only has an impact on migrant numbers if you're assuming that there's a bunch of dodgy operators out there. And like there may be, but like shouldn't that be the focus? Like, why is the headline migrants? We're going to stop the migrants. Policy. You know what I mean? Like that seems weird to me.
It's interesting. So obviously there hasn't been announced yet. This is allegedly coming tomorrow, and I'm sure we'll get further detail on what a low quality course is.
Yes, I would like some more information.
It's not really
that will be
defined.
Interesting.
But like there was a couple of years ago, like prior to the pandemic, like we're talking sort of 2017, 18, around that sort of period, there was a crackdown on TAFE providers that were just ripping people off, basically. Like,
that is a real
in fucking basket weaving, and like we'll charge you $20,000 for it.
That is absolutely a real phenomenon. I guess what I'm saying is like, are we suggesting, like TAFE now as a result of that is now much more highly regulated than a lot of higher education institutions. There are bodies like ASQA and things like that do regulate TAFE and vocational education in a way that's pretty rigorous from what I understand.
Yeah.
So given that those are the standard, like, are they saying like that is not a sufficient standard, or, those changes have been made. So it's like, is the problem migrants or is the problem dodgy courses? Because it feels like we're focusing on the migrant. And I understand from like a purely mathematical perspective, it's like if you have 1 million homes available in Australia and you're adding 500,000 people every year, like obviously the maths there isn't mathing.
No, it's not mathing.
You're going to have a situation where you've got more people than houses, and that's going to lead to negative outcomes for society, right? Like for housing affordability, for homelessness, like there's a number of flow-on sort of second-order effects that happen when you just are importing more people than you can reasonably handle.
Yeah.
But
it creates issues with like social cohesion and other things as well. Like the problem is that Australia's economy for the last, I want to say like 8 years, 9 years, probably longer, has been skating by on positive growth with just pumping more people into the economy.
We are in a per capita recession right now. The only reason Australia hasn't experienced negative GDP growth in the last year is not because
population.
The economy is doing good. We've just added more people. Like that is the reason.
Yeah.
So it's like per person, the amount of GDP, gross domestic product, that each one of us is producing and consuming is less. It's just that there's more people, so the headline number looks bigger. So, it's not a good.
Contributes to inflation. That is what is driving inflation, which is what the government's doing. There was a report, a review, published in April into the migration system by Martin Parkinson, who's the former secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, which found the visa system was, quote, broken. And Australia's migration system has often been criticised. Like we've all probably had friends who have, come here from overseas, who, have had to do weird, like they've had to go work in Queensland for 6 months to be able to get the visa
like
that they want to be able to.
Thing where they're like, you're going to go pick fruit for a certain amount of time if you want to stay here, and all sorts of weird shit.
like you do an application and it takes 6 months for it to get processed, and then like you don't have any opportunity to like to object. Stuff like it should be a lot more seamless than it is, and it's very clunky. And it's deliberately clunky to stop this phenomenon, I guess, where people are migrating to Australia in record numbers.
The irony is, though, it's like if you want to make changes that contribute positively to mid to long-term inflation, getting a bunch of migrants into the country and taking pressure off the labor system is probably a good way of doing that, right? Like,
the problem is you don't know where to put them. So you can have the workers here contributing to the economy, but that's also increasing expenditure, which therefore adds to inflation. But also,
short term it's bad for inflation, but longer term it's good, right? And that's probably why we've had such stable wages in these kinds of like care sectors over the last 10, 15 years, is because of that longer term trend of immigration coming through and filling those jobs that Australians frankly don't want to do. Like I don't know if it's Australians think that they're better than a lot of these roles or what it is. Like, like I don't want to be fruit picking, like, that's beneath me kind of thing. But you look at the people that are fulfilling those jobs, they are migrants. They are traditionally, Southeast Asian, Latin American, those areas where they've got underprivileged people and they want to have a better standard of living. And they come here and they take the jobs that they can get and the jobs that no one else wants to do. And, cleaning, care, those kinds of responsibilities. And that's probably why, like, the wages have been down in those industries, have been appalling, frankly, for the last 15, 20 years. And that's probably one of the things that's sort of taken the air out of the inflation bubble. Prior to the pandemic, we didn't have, our problem was that inflation was stubbornly low. It wasn't hitting target from the other side, is that we weren't getting up to the 2 to 3% inflation target every year. And their response was to just lower rates and pump more money into the economy. But I think there were these larger dynamics happening with labor and, that were having the opposite sort of effect for so many years. And then now that they've punched $1 trillion into the economy, they're like, whoa, let's slow down. Have you considered not spending as much on luxury items like petrol or groceries?
It's interesting. There's those political parties that you see at the bottom of the ballot box every election, like the Sustainable Australia Party and stuff. And it's, sometimes you think, some of their policies are whack, and some of them you just go, oh, maybe some of those aren't such a bad idea, but we'll see. Tom, what are your thoughts? Do you have do you think that this announcement, we're sort of speculating into the crystal ball, but do you think this announcement tomorrow will be something crazy, or is it going to be a really modest announcement that the ABC is overblowing?
I mean, probably modest by, I think, probably policy announcement standards. It's not like they're going to say guns are citizens or something. Like, it's not going to be something like truly like Donald Trump bananas. I can't take credit for guns are citizens. It was just the first crazy policy idea someone suggested in a gag once. But it just feels like I don't know, like, while all these issues with inflation and just like the Band-Aid that we're putting on economic issues with just throwing more people at it and all that sort of stuff are all terrible. It just feels like another let's also somehow try to make this appeal to people who think there should be less foreigners in the country. Where they're focusing, I feel they're focusing on the wrong thing. Like, I don't know maybe what the right thing should be, but it just seems like them going like, all right, cool. What'll appeal to maybe people who might vote for us, who we can claw over from the Dutton
you look at
side
the
of things.
detail,
Let's cut down migrants. That sounds good to them.
Yeah, because if you look at the detail of what they're proposing is clamping down on dodgy education providers. That's the detail. But the headline is slowing down migrants. So to take a step back from that and go back to my year 10 literature class, do a bit of critical analysis on that. You go, who are we speaking to? Who's the author? What are they trying to communicate?
So that's the thing of whether or not. So is it the ABC or media companies pushing that, or is that what the highlight of the press release was?
No,
that's going out to everybody, and they've chosen to work with it. Like, just thinking about how these sorts of things work. It's like you see on programs, programs that highlight like, you know, your media watchers, your all that sort of stuff, where they highlight all the different, like, you know, how a lot of the media organizations use the same like
press release without even looking at it,
and you're like, oh, so that was clearly probably in the press release, and they're all running with it.
A lot of copy and pasting.
Yeah. So it's whether or not, was the press release from the government was the hook, migration strategy limiting the amount of migrants into the country, or was it more focused on the other detail? But the journalists are going, oh, are they trying to sneak in cut migration policy in here, and that's what we're focusing on, or is it their bias wanting to talk about that more anyway? Like, you know, there's so many factors. It's unsure. It's hard to see precisely where that's coming from, but it's just more like this shouldn't be being framed around let's lower migration.
But I think that's deliberate. I think that's what you're saying, Tom. I think they're trying to appeal to a kind of racist, you know, sort of far right minority that like the idea of cutting down on migration. And the thing is, like, wanting to cut down on migration when you haven't got places to put migrants is not inherently a racist idea. However, talking about it appeals overwhelmingly to racists. You know what I mean? Like, I did feel awkward talking about this because as soon as I open my mouth talking about adjusting migration numbers, right, I know the first thing that some racist shithead's going to go, yeah, and now the Jewish banking conspiracy. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, the racists, it's not necessarily a racist policy, but the racists are the only ones that are going to get excited about it.
It's true. I mean, but I think the reason why the article's taken this view is that it has been flagged by the government as something they're looking into. So there was the review that they did, and then the Prime Minister has also said we do need to have our migration levels brought to a sustainable level, is the quote.
That's the focus. That's the problem that we're solving, right, is the migration levels.
Yeah, he had foreshadowed a crackdown on foreign students in particular. So this is where this is coming from. Now, I agree. I think the numbers is a tool, like it's a lever, right? Migration numbers is a lever the government can use to do different things to the economy. But the racist element will be how they do that. Is it just solely focused on
is it
people?
Are we working on like dodgy education sort of things for it to be a net benefit, or is it a Donald Trump quote shithole countries unquote kind of action? Right?
That people from Canada and the UK and that those guys can come in here and get a visa, no worries. Right. And is it just
you can get a visa to come over here and learn clogging? Like, that can be your degree. Yeah, great. Like, oh, you're from the UK? Perfect.
And Australia,
I don't know.
Australia is already famous internationally for having a pretty stringent sort of test when it comes to how, like, in order to really select for skilled labor in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's not as though it's just like...
not just necessarily like tertiary education, you mean?
So there is a points-based system that Australia uses to qualify immigrants or potential immigrants to the country. And one of the things that makes you more highly valued in that system is coming in with qualifications already. Now, if you want to attain those qualifications in Australia at Australian universities, that's also valuable in a different way. But if you are, like, if you got 100 people and, half of them present with skills ready to go, ready to start contributing day one to the economy without costing them anything. Well, that half is going to get through easier than the half that are coming to Australia wanting to get skills, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and you'll notice that other regimes elsewhere that are, how do I phrase this? Racist will point to Australia's points-based immigration scheme as a way of staunching the flow of migrants into their country. So I'm thinking particularly of Britain. They've pointed to Australians, like the far right racists in Britain will point to Australia's immigration system and go, see, that's what they're doing over there. That's what we should be doing here, rather than getting all these bloody Polish people coming in, bloody EU, Brexit, like that was a real central argument around the Brexit thing. It's like, we're getting all these unskilled Polish people just coming in London, and we should have a system like Australia where they select for the skilled migration. It's like, oh, don't use us as the example, buddy. We don't want to necessarily be part of this conversation.
Yeah.
Why are we always the example for bad things?
Well, we're the example of good things when it comes to gun control. So that's something.
Yeah, it's true.
It's a +1 in the good column. A +1 in the bad column is that there's been some furore over the NDIS Commissioner Tracy Mackey, where there's been a lawsuit basically with one of the deputies, Jeffrey Chan, who has sued. I think who's he sued? He's sued Ms. Mackey and the government, I guess.
So the commission,
commission, for basically, I guess, being suspended.
Well, so what the details was there was this the regulator, so that's being the NDIS Commission, had told the ABC. So the ABC a little while ago in a Four Corners report brought an allegation to the commission saying, "Hey, we've got documented evidence of people being treated in programs that are being funded by the NDIS, and there's some really disturbing video of a kid with autism being sort of pinned to the ground by six guys, and not being allowed to get up, essentially, which is against the rules." She then made the claim that program had been shut down, and then turns out the program hadn't been shut down, and she said, "Shit, I'm going to get fired for lying to the ABC," and then sort of threw her deputy, Jeffrey Chan, under the bus, who was the person who I guess provided her that information. Now, the interesting thing about that program that I mentioned is that it was shut down, but not by the commission. They just chose to stop operating, I guess, and left the country. It was a foreign company that was running the program. So it's it wasn't even...
I wonder why they decided to stop and leave the country. It's they just decided to stop. No correlation.
Curious. A question for the ages. So that's interesting. That it's not even that the NDIS saw that there was unacceptable behavior and then shut them down. It was that that they just chose to leave of their own accord.
Yeah.
So
they were our work here is done.
Just hitting the old dusty trail.
Yep. And when there were no more autistic people to traumatize, we left the country.
Yeah. My work is complete. So Dr. Chan was suspended, and then the Justice Yassine Sharif ruled on Friday that the court documents should be made public. And he also ruled that Dr. Chan's suspension should be temporarily lifted, and he should be allowed to return to work while the case proceeds. So that's going to be a very awkward first day back at work, I would think. Just hey, buddy, remember how you suspended me? The federal court says I can come to work now. So see you at lunch.
That would definitely be we have to move your office down the hall.
Why is that? Got any tasks for me, boss? No? Nothing?
Anything of a Slack chat? Nothing of a Slack chat.
Nothing.
Okay,
weird.
great.
I really thought I'd have a lot to come back to, what with being suspended for a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
so,
great.
But that's great. Cool. Well, I guess I'll see you when I'm looking at you.
Yeah, it's not great. And it's one of those things where obviously this happens. I would say this kind of thing where whenever something comes out that the government or a government agency has done sort of incorrectly or against the law or whatever, that there is always sort of there's someone who has moved on or resigns or whatever else.
There is a head that rolls, right?
Yeah.
Do you mean during the weekly government accountability hour, Four Corners? The only program that seems to be doing any kind of investigative journalism whatsoever in this country anymore.
Some of the quotes from Dr. Chan's affidavit are pretty fun. Namely, when Dr. Chan brought the attention to Ms. Mackey that the program had not been shut down, his affidavit alleges that she said, quote, "fuck," and that means I lied on national television. And then says, I may need to resign, but to tender my resignation. But then 2 hours after this conversation occurred was when he alleges that she said, "I think it's best that you stand aside."
Actually,
as that this is better than if the minister decides to take action. Because if the minister decides to take action, that would be bad for us.
I thought about
Like,
it, and what I've thought is best for me is that you resign.
Yeah, like it's all allegations in an affidavit, so not sure if those are like accurate quotes, but just that they wrote them down. Just fuck, that means I lied on national television. Is a great one.
It's like that Shrek meme, the Shrek thing where he's like, "Some of you may die,
Some of you may die, but that is a sacrifice I am willing to make."
Yes, that I'm willing to make. Yeah, it's better if you resign.
Yeah, what if you do it? Like it's a fucking play or something.
Yeah,
but the actual allegations the Four Corners are talking about are pretty disturbing.
Deeply upsetting. That's what I meant.
I hadn't
these are
actually
people
heard about them.
Yeah, these are people on the spectrum being traumatized. Being pinned down by 6 people, I think would upset anybody.
Oh,
but,
I mean, unless
people on the autism spectrum, especially so.
I was going to say, unless you've got a safe word, then. But yeah, no, it's generally accepted that people do not want to be pinned down, and obviously that was not a legal hold, a legal way of restraining someone. It was meant to be like some sort of revolutionary new therapy from the States where we abuse children. Like, I don't know exactly what the idea with it was. They're all sort of like geared up with like helmets and sort of stuff. Like, clearly it wasn't like a one-off, like we just decided to restrain this kid because he was hurting someone, or clearly this was like an organized thing.
Someone bought the stationery. They bought the equipment.
Yeah, there's like a mat on the floor where they were like, had a process of sort of like kicking the mat down to hold him down on the mat, but rather than just like on the ground. So like clearly this is like a very organized and like just horrifying visuals to like listen to someone like screaming, being restrained. I was just like, how is this happening in this fucking country?
This is the kind of thing that they used to do in asylums back in the 50s.
Yeah,
that they make
that's what it reminded me of.
Make
it reminded me of like Kellogg's fucking sanitarium, where they were like, eat cereal and don't touch your wiener and you'll be healed. Like, that's the kind of fucking mentality that's going on right here. Like,
fucking terrifying.
NDIS Minister Bill Shorten said it would be inappropriate to comment on an ongoing court matter. But he said, I have made it patently. Is that a real word?
Yeah.
Anyway, clear. My expectation is that there needs to be a complete culture change at the Commission, and proactive participant safeguarding must be the highest priority. So there's the NDIS, which is the scheme that funds
the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Yeah.
And then there is the NDIS Safety and I think what's it called? Standards Commission, which basically they're a regulatory body. Yeah. So that's where the issue is in this instance. Now, it's funny because I'm pretty sure there was a royal commission into the NDIS, or at least a commission inquiry, not more than like, a year ago or something. And one of the things Bill Shorten's been sort of tasked with is that to sort of fix, particularly in the era of budget constraints. I remember when the federal when the federal government announced the budget, there was a lot of questions around, how much extra money you're going to pump into the NDIS, and will that contribute to inflation? But the answer was not a little bit, but not a lot. Basically,
they had struck a deal, I think, just recently in the last week or two, talking about like an 8% increase as opposed to 15% increase, trying to sort of make sure that the program's viable going forward and that the growth isn't too explosive. Initially, when the government came to power, they talked about dealing a lot with consultants and, all of these sort of third-party hangers-on who were sort of like getting money from the scheme but not actually providing services, like just like administration for navigating an extremely complex service. And I think they've stopped talking about that aspect of it so much because they realize there's not actually that much to cut there necessarily, and people need advisors to navigate the program because it is so labyrinthian and complex. So they're trying to find other ways of saving money, but it's like, obviously the explosive growth of the program suggests that people need these services. So by restricting the amount of additional money that goes in, aren't you just denying people that need the services? Like,
what did we do before the NDIS?
I don't know.
It's only been around since the Gillard government, I believe, or the Rudd government, sort of around 2010, 2011. It's only been, and I guess it must have been worked on before then, but it's only been around for about 10 years. So like what did we do before that? Like, did we just let people roll around on the floor and like how did people get in that? Like, I don't know.
I guess we had a more comprehensive public healthcare system that took care of, like I remember my mum talking about how, asylums and those kind of like public mental health care services were really restricted in the 80s. Like a lot of them shut down. The government was just like, yeah, we don't want to pay for this anymore. So like, you'll deal with it and just
you're on your own.
Set people loose. And I guess 20 years of that, people going, actually, we really need some sort of we really
system.
Need government to play a role here because what we are doing is not working. And that's how we got to the NDIS. But
my mum's spoken about that. So when she was training to be a midwife back in the 80s, they still had an asylum at Norfolk, which had been running. This is in Tasmania, which had been running since like the 1800s. It's alleged to be horrifically haunted. Like it's one of the scariest buildings to like spend a night in Tasmania. But anyway, the point being was that they were all, and the town got sort of this bad rap because it was where all the nuts lived, and then early 90s rolled around and they just, the government was like, well, this is not how we treat people anymore. Now we're going to put them in the community and they'll live in the community and we'll service them in the community, support them in the community. And they literally closed down the facility and off everyone went. But
which is fine if there's then appropriate outpatient community support to support those people in the community. Yeah. But then what they did is, we don't want to pay for that either. It's just like budget cuts. Sorry, bitches.
Yeah.
I guess the thing being is it was a state government responsibility, right? Because that's a healthcare thing, which is a state government responsibility, whereas the NDIS is a federal scheme. So I guess it helps support the states. The states probably had their own. This is what I'm assuming. I'm just making this up, but I'm assuming the states would have had their own support mechanisms for people with disabilities, and that was funded through whatever means they had available. But it's interesting, sort of. Over the last 2 years, hearing about how the NDIS needs a lot of work, and I don't know how much work you need to do to make it into like it's one of those things where it's like, it's an exponential growth thing. Like you'll never have enough because there'll always be a requirement for more, and the more you pump in will drive more sort of demand.
I think the UK
services.
has got a similar discussion ongoing, talking about their NHS, National Health Service, in that there's a constant growth in expenditure. And if we keep growing at this rate, it's going to cost us $11 quadrillion by 2060 sort of thing. Like, but I don't think that's necessarily a good argument for not funding services. I would argue that's the entire point of government, right? Like the whole reason we give them our income tax and don't complain too much about it is because it goes to services and helping people and doing things that need to be done. So I would argue that is much more a function of government. I would rather my tax dollars go to the NDIS, which increases at a rate of whatever, 8-12%. If it meets people's needs and does what it's supposed to do, I would rather my money goes to that than a bunch of fucking submarines. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
100%. I would much rather any of my taxes go to like improving the life of someone else than building submarines.
Yeah, here's a crazy idea.
It shouldn't matter how much money you make if you have extra needs.
Maybe government services should serve
serve them to you.
Yeah. Like, that is what they are for.
Yeah. You shouldn't be priced out of
mental health
being able to live comfortably.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I don't have any jokes to end on. Annastacia Palaszczuk resigned. That happened.
Yeah, like literally this afternoon. It was funny. The news alert came up on my phone saying like, Palaszczuk is expected to resign this afternoon. And then I clicked the notification to read the article, and that was literally it. It was that sentence. And then this story is developing. I'm like, oh, so you have nothing.
We got nothing.
You've got no extra detail.
There's a bit of the video clip where she talks about her retirement. So I just wanted to play a little bit because I have a joke about it. So
I turned my mind to this when I was trying to have a holiday with my partner, and everyone deserves a break. Finally, last week, my mind was made up at National Cabinet. I was sitting there thinking, this is the fourth Prime Minister. There were all these new faces around the cabinet table. We got a great deal for Queensland, $4 billion. And I thought to myself, renewal is a good thing. When I led this party from an opposition of just 7 members, I said that the first election would be like climbing Mount Everest. I went on to climb that mountain twice more. I don't need to do it again. I have given it my all, and I've run a marathon. Standing here today with these flags alongside and standing up for the people of Queensland has been an honour of my life. I don't believe anyone who comes after me will know how humbling it is. To travel this state and meet so many amazing people.
Yeah, so a very heartfelt resignation there from Annastacia Palaszczuk. I did think it was a bit funny though when she said, you know, I was there at the what'd you call it? The National Cabinet. I just looked around. I thought, fuck these pricks.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well.
I'm fucking sick of these fucking people.
Well, just like, this is my 4th Prime Minister, a whole new room of faces.
I'm done with it. It's like season 9 of Scrubs. Just let it go.
Yeah. It's like, I'm not going to learn a whole bunch of new names. That's it. I'm out.
Anyway, but no, it was very tearful, very, very heartfelt resignation from Annastacia Palaszczuk. And she's going to be spending more time with her family and being a bit more present. I totally get why being premier over the last like 3 or 4 years would have been just an absolute shit show. Like, why would you do it? No.
Why would anyone ever want to be a political leader?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think most of the COVID premiers have now resigned. Gutwin's gone.
Yeah, resigned or resigned from a great height.
Yes.
Gutwin, New South Wales has changed. Now Queensland. So that's the east.
What about
Victoria?
WA's premier?
WA might have switched as well.
I thought McGowan has resigned.
Yeah, McGowan resigned, and then South Australia. I can't remember what happened in South Australia. So yeah, I mean,
I know, and New South Wales has changed twice.
Yeah,
Gladys was the premier over like the peak of the pandemic, and then
it was Dom Perignon.
Yeah, Dom Perignon and his many children came in, and then he lost an election to Chris Minns.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I guess the Gutwin, who's the Tasmanian premier, he pretty much said the same thing. He was like, I just can't. It's just too much. Like, I'm done. I'm just burnt. I physically can't do any more of this.
Yeah,
like,
it's pretty intense.
I'm gonna have to learn all these names again.
Yeah, it's so hard.
Well, hopefully they're just not going to be doing anything that's worth talking about.
I really do think that, like, for most people, state government like officials should not be like named persons that are like, like that have
names.
Household names. Yes, thank you. That's exactly the term I was looking for. Yeah, like people should really, like, if government is working well, especially at a state level, it should just be kind of like humming along in the background. You shouldn't need too much time and attention. There shouldn't be like, call it Dictator Dan marches in the city and things like that. Like, what's the name of the current Victorian premier? Her name, Jacinta Allen.
Jacinta Allen,
like, I should know that is who she is. Like, if someone asks me in a game of trivia, I should be able to name her. I shouldn't have much more like massively detailed information than that. I think the fact that we are so intimately involved with every single political figure now, there's such a spotlight on these political figures is probably like a negative thing for our system. The fact that we are so overly politicized that everything needs to go through the lens of the two-party system on not just a federal level, but a state level now as well. It's like that can't be good.
I mean, it's kind of, I guess, why, we got to loop back to our first article that, certain governments, try and do things potentially quietly, or that they try to find ways to potentially streamline things, because if there is a lot of focus and noise, it does detract from the ability of a government to do its job. But by the same token, I don't know, you do want scrutiny, you do want to have transparency, and you do want people to be aware of their political apparatus and leaders. You don't want ignorance. So I don't know. I feel like there's a middle ground there somewhere. You don't want it to be like Princess Diana levels of chaos and Donald Trump levels of chaos, but you want it to be monitored.
There's a difference between an informed citizenry and like negative partisanship, like hyper focus on your enemies. I think that's why a lot of people knew the name Dan Andrews, is because like he was doing like daily press conferences during COVID. But then also like there was this like massive negative reaction against Dan Andrews, and then that got reported on and reported out and all these things. So it's like, yeah, I would much rather we have a state of affairs where like, okay, I know the suburban rail loop's a thing. Like, let's look at that policy and make sure it's a good one. And that is the extent of my involvement. Like you say, that the happy medium between like complete ignorance and like hyper-partisan polarization, like granular detail, looking at every possible little fuck up and trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. Like there's got to be somewhere it's just like a report comes out from the ombudsman and then we read it and then we move on. Like I don't see it happening to you, but
those daily press conferences. So it's like 11 a.m. sharp. Will we be able to have picnics ever again?
Yeah. Oh. Was he wearing the polar fleece, or is he wearing a suit?
Yes.
Like if he's in a suit or a North Face puffer vest,
bad news.
Like, you'd have to know. And if it's like, it was like suit was bad news, puffer vest, pretty good news. Puffer vest and it's Friday, great news. Suit and it's Sunday, terrible news. Yeah. Like fucked if it's Sunday and he's in the suit. Because, oh boy, who wants to work on a Sunday?
I think government should be there to service, to service people. That sounds a bit funny, but to make people's lives easier, right? And when it becomes a contention, a point of contention, or something that's there to argue about, then it's inevitably not a good thing. I don't know how we reverse that trend, but I think we're definitely heading towards the hyperpartisanship polarization.
I really want to know what was on Hunter Biden's laptop, George. I really want to know.
So cute. Other than his just massive hog.
Yeah.
What else?
Other than just pictures of him having a rad time, it seems.
No, I want to see the documents.
The documents.
Okay. On that note, we have been, we are, and we always will be Unnatural Selection. Make sure you visit us at our salubrious home on the web, unnaturalshow.com. Make sure you visit us on all the bullshit social medias that have, do, or ever will exist at our handle, Unnatural Show. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Threads, and Motherflippin' TikTok. Make sure you follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Threads at George Tsipos.
You can follow me on Twitter at Tom D. Heath.
And you can follow me down to the public service where I'll be auditioning. That's not what you do. You apply for a hyperpartisan position.
Performing arts students, can you tell?
And
and if you are so inclined, if you like the show, and not if you didn't like the show, but only if you did like the show and you found it, if you're as opinionated as we are, I would encourage you to share that positive opinion, and positive opinions only, on our ratings. So if you go to Spotify, if you listen to us on Spotify, there's a way of rating the podcast right there. Similarly, you can go to our Apple Podcast page and give us 5 stars. Fun fact, the rating system only allows and only accepts 5-star ratings. Thanks for listening, guys. I love your faces. We'll see you next week.